By the time Gardaí forced their way into a house on the Moneymore estate in Drogheda, County Louth, 22-year-old Aaron Rochford was already teetering on the edge of death. Hours earlier, on November 11, 2018, he'd been dragged off the street as part of the Drogheda Gangland feud that had exploded months earlier. Inside, armed support unit officers discovered a scene of raw brutality. Rochford was crouched naked in a bath, shaking, dazed, and drenched in blood. His jaw was shattered. Deep gashes carved across his torso and head spoke of a sustained and savage beating. The house itself bore the hallmarks of a torture chamber. A Stanley knife and a crossbow lay nearby, grim reminders of the weapons used to torment him. The attack was not random. It was a message, one of many acts of violence in a feud that had already claimed lives and would go on to plunge Drogheda into years of bloodshed, abductions, and reprisals. For the young man pulled from that house, survival was nothing short of a miracle. For the town, it was another chilling warning that the feud was spiraling into something darker and more ruthless than anyone had imagined. Drogheda brothers Josh and Keith Bolan were among 4 men charged over the abduction and savage beating of Aaron Rochford. Then they vanished. By June 2020, Dublin Circuit Criminal Court was told the brothers had gone off the radar after bail. Bench warrants went out. Gardaí came up empty. 5 years on, they're still ghosts. Investigators believe the trail has run through Turkey, Dubai, Spain, and Thailand, sometimes together, often apart, and more recently to South America. In court and Garda briefings, 30-year-old Keith is described as the alleged head of the Bolan organised crime group, with 26-year-old Josh the second in command, a network linked by investigators to drug importation. Both came out of Drogheda's Moneymore estate, long flagged for deprivation and targeted for regeneration under the government's RAPID program, an address that shaped their beginnings long before the feud did. From their teens, the Bolan brothers were already in the slipstream of the local drug trade. With a tight circle of friends, they were junior members of the criminal network run by Owen and Brendan Maguire, the older, established power in the area. The Maguires, in turn, were aligned with regional heavyweight Cornelius Price, whom investigators suspect of several drug-related murders. However, ambition eclipsed obedience. The Bolans and their young associates outgrew their underling roles in the Maguire-Price operation, and instead of taking orders, set their sights on dethroning their bosses. Control of Louth's lucrative drug market was the prize, and with it came reach into Meath and deep pockets of North Dublin, a crown that meant money, muscle, and momentum. From early 2017, the break became a war. The Bolan outfit, quickly labelled the anti-Maguire faction, squared up to Owen Maguire and his associates after the original trafficking network fractured into 2 bitterly opposed camps, each intent on owning Drogheda's illegal trade. On the ground, the human cost mounted. Local representatives relate disturbing accounts from families and youth workers. Even children, they warned, were being dragged into errands and intimidation as the feud tightened its grip. The slow burn finally flashed. In July 2018, gunmen from the Bolan side allegedly targeted Owen Maguire on Cement Road in Drogheda, an attack that turned simmering tensions into open conflict and set the tone for the blood-streaked months that followed. When they decided to take on the Maguire-Price mob, Keith Bolan was just 22, his brother only 18, young men stepping into a fight that would reshape the town's criminal landscape. Maguire was ambushed with a hail of 6 bullets outside his Drogheda home, one round tearing into his spine and leaving him permanently paralyzed, condemned to a life in a wheelchair. He was discovered collapsed on the ground, wedged between a Ford Transit van and a mobile home, his body lying close to the driver's door where the gunfire had erupted. In court, the notorious Gangland hitman Robbie Lawler, himself later executed in a bloody revenge killing, was named as the gunman. Witnesses claimed that as he squeezed the trigger, Lawler chillingly declared, "These are from Keith." That single moment not only crippled Maguire, but ignited one of the most ferocious underworld feuds in recent Irish history, the brutal conflict between the Price-Maguire organised crime group, OCG, and the rival Bolan OCG. Lawler, closely tied to Richie Carberry, his brother-in-law and a trusted Bolan lieutenant, was long considered a staunch Bolan ally. The fallout was catastrophic. In the months after Maguire's shooting, violence spiraled completely out of control, with more than 100 brutal incidents rocking Drogheda and beyond. Multiple shootings in broad daylight, a kidnapping, houses torched with petrol bombs, savage assaults on the streets, and at least 4 cold-blooded murders. Among the shocking incidents that erupted during the feud was a foiled attempt to detonate a car bomb outside the Bolan family home in Moneymore. The vehicle, rigged with 2 gas cylinders, was intercepted before it could explode, and suspicion immediately fell on 22-year-old Aaron Rochford, whom the Bolan gang accused of driving the car. That very night, Gardaí received a chilling report. Josh Bolan had allegedly forced Rochford into a Volkswagen and taken him straight to the Bolan stronghold in Moneymore. When officers eventually arrived at the scene, they discovered Rochford under vicious attack by 2 men. The assailants bolted next door, but within minutes, 5 men, including Josh Bolan himself, were arrested. CCTV footage later identified one of the attackers as Dean Thornton, a 25-year-old drug dealer and trusted Bolan associate, who was caught on camera punching Rochford as they dragged him into the property. Inside the house, the violence escalated into sheer barbarity. Rochford was stripped naked and subjected to a prolonged ordeal of torture. The gang slashed and stabbed him with knives, beat him mercilessly, and left him with horrific injuries, multiple stab wounds, brutal swelling, and a shattered jaw. The savagery was so extreme, it even shocked hardened investigators. Thornton would later be sentenced to 3 years in prison for his role in the abduction and torture, but the incident cemented the feud's reputation as one of the most savage gang wars Ireland had ever seen. From late 2018 to 2019, petrol bombs became a hallmark of the Drogheda feud, torching homes and cars across the town. 2 days before Aaron Rochford was abducted, a viable device was found burning in the exhaust of a car owned by a female friend of Keith Bolan. Investigators believe the Bolan faction was behind 2 December 2018 arson attacks, separate incidents in which a car and a house was set alight. Days later, Gardaí recovered roughly 400 rounds of ammunition and 2 pipe bombs, believed to be the group's cachet and intended for use in the fight against the Price Maguire side. In February 2019, Brendan Maguire, Owen Maguire's older brother, became the feud's next target. In broad daylight, at the M1 retail park in Drogheda, around 2:45 p.m, he stepped out of a gym and moved toward a white Vauxhall Astra with 2 others. A car swept past and a handgun barked. Multiple rounds hit the Astra amid a busy scene opposite a toy shop, shoppers and gym-goers scattering. Against the odds, Brendan survived. By May 2019, residents were marching against the violence. Almost immediately, the feud snapped back. Keith Bolan was driving toward his sister's house when a dark car tucked in behind him. A second vehicle drew level and opened fire. Bullets struck Keith in the chin and shoulder. He floored it, left the scene, and presented at Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital with minor wounds, offering Gardaí nothing. Keith Brannigan, a trusted associate of Keith Bolan, was ruthlessly executed at the Ashling Caravan Park in Clowerhead in August 2019, just 3 weeks after celebrating his first wedding anniversary. The hitman, chauffeured into the park in a stolen Lexus, stepped out with deadly precision. As Brannigan worked on the decking of a newly installed mobile home, the gunman opened fire, cutting him down in cold blood before calmly retreating to the waiting vehicle and vanishing from the scene. Although the Drogheda feud had formally erupted in July 2018, Brannigan was already deeply entwined in the underworld alliances that fueled it. His close ties to Keith Bolan, young, ambitious, and rapidly rising as a central figure in the conflict, made him a marked man in a war where association alone could prove fatal. Just 3 months after Brannigan's killing, the violence claimed another key figure, Richie Carberry. Also aligned with Keith Bolan, Carberry was gunned down in Bettystown in a meticulously planned hit. Married to the sister of the feared gunman Robbie Lawler, Carberry was no stranger to the criminal world. After moving from Coolock to Meath, he quickly spotted the Bolan gang's growing influence and sought to cement their power. Using his far-reaching contacts, Carberry became instrumental in supplying and directing the gang's operations. Crucially, their muscle was bolstered by none other than Carberry's brother-in-law, Robbie Lawler, an infamous enforcer whose reputation as a freelance hitman stretched across multiple Dublin gangs. Lawler's shadow loomed large, and with his backing, the Bolan faction's ascent became impossible to ignore. The feud then reached its most grotesque and shocking climax with one of Ireland's most appalling murders. the brutal killing of 17-year-old Keane Mulready Woods, just months after Richie Carberry's death. Robbie Lawler, freshly released from prison and consumed with rage over his brother-in-law's assassination, appeared determined to send a message that would terrify his enemies. On the very night Keane's distraught mother walked into Drogheda Garda station to report her son missing, detectives were already receiving intelligence that he had been murdered. Wiretaps had tracked calls between Lawler and associates of the Price faction, during which Lawler openly boasted about what he was about to do. On Keane's final day alive, he took a phone call from Paul Crosby, trusted lieutenant of the Bolan brothers and one of the feud's most notorious players. Minutes later, Keane got into a taxi using his own phone, a reckless move that revealed how unsophisticated the plan truly was. 5 minutes after arriving, he was collected by Gerard Rocky Cruz, another associate of the Bolan brothers. CCTV later captured Keane, Cruz, Robbie Lawler, and Crosby entering the rear of a house in Rathmullen Park, owned by a man named Ged McKenna. It was 6:50 p.m. That chilling image was the last confirmed sighting of Keane alive. What happened inside that house is believed to have been nothing short of barbaric. Lawler is thought to have personally killed Keane before enlisting Crosby, Cruz, and others to help dismember the teenager's body. Equipped with bags and cutting tools, they carved his remains apart, intending to scatter them across Dublin as a grotesque warning to their rivals. On the night of January 13th, a Puma sports bag, later confirmed to have been supplied by Gerard Cruz, was seen being hurled from a moving car in Coolock. Inside were Keane's severed legs. 2 days later, in the early hours of January 15th, firefighters discovered Keane's head and hands stuffed into the back of a torched car in Drumcondra. Almost 2 months later, on March 11th, Keane's torso was unearthed near Rathmullen Park in Drogheda, yards from the house where he was last seen. DNA confirmed the grisly find. A post-mortem later concluded that Keane was already dead when his young body was butchered, a small mercy in an act of cruelty that stunned the nation and etched his murder into Irish criminal history as one of the most chilling atrocities ever committed. Robbie Lawler was convinced Keane had helped facilitate the hit on Richie Carberry and is said to have ordered the teenager's head delivered to Cornelius Price's compound, a message aimed squarely at a man with a personal bond to Keane. In the aftermath, Price fled to the UK, tapping a wide traveller network in the Midlands, where he is thought to have plotted reprisals from relative safety. But attrition set in. As the gun feud dragged on, command chains frayed, and the muscle on both sides thinned. Some jailed, some scattered, others dead. Gardaí launched Operation Stratus early to contain, then choke off the violence. Ultimately, Gardaí built cases against several alleged drivers of the feud. Some are now behind bars, others remain abroad, trying to outrun charges. A number of the most feared men who ordered or carried out the attacks have since been killed or jailed. Robbie Lawler was gunned down in Belfast in April 2020 after walking into a carefully laid trap. For the Bolans, it was a gut punch. They swiftly skipped bail and fled overseas. The courts kept grinding on. In 2023, Paul Crosby pleaded guilty at the Special Criminal Court to facilitating the murder of Keane Mulready Woods, as did his associate, Gerard Rocky Cruz. Crosby received 10 years. Cruz was jailed for 7. Across the Maguire-Price side, Owen Maguire has not appeared publicly since the 2018 shooting, blamed on Lawler, that left him paralysed. His brother Brendan disappeared after being charged with feud-related offences involving weapons and violent disorder. Now living in the UK, he still carries a bullet in his neck from the 2019 attempt on his life and has struggled with mental health problems. Their ally Cornelius Price was diagnosed with limbic encephalitis in 2020 and died in the UK in early 2023. Irish reporting continues to portray Keith and Josh Bolan as fugitives abroad, with bench warrants still outstanding since 2020. They face serious charges, including false imprisonment, arising from the Rochford abduction in Moneymore back in 2018. Irish outlets have tracked their alleged movements and assets amid ongoing cab actions and Garda operations against both factions. In June 2025, during a criminal court hearing where several women faced money laundering charges, the brothers were named in open court as the alleged leaders of the Bolan organised crime group, tied to the Drogheda feud. Prosecutors said the laundering related to activity in 2020 to 2021 linked to the group. It was the first time the pair had been publicly identified as alleged gangheads. Sources say the unmasking will infuriate the brothers, who had avoided being named for more than 7 years and will make it harder to recruit couriers to ferry drugs into Drogheda. Josh is said to be based in Thailand, and several mules have been intercepted bringing consignments from there. In one case, Jamie Mann from Drogheda was recently jailed in Norway for 3 years for importing 29.9 kilos of cannabis from Thailand, drugs believed to have been destined for Drogheda. On the night of November 17, 2021, Dublin drug dealer Gary the Canary Carey had visited a house on Ballyfermot Crescent in Dublin 10. It was just after 7:30 p.m. when he stepped into his Volkswagen with an associate, unaware that danger was seconds away. As Carey turned the ignition, a stolen black Opel Zafira suddenly screeched to a halt in front of them, cutting off any chance of escape. 2 gunmen opened fire through the windscreen, 10 rounds at point-blank range, the air erupting with the crack of gunfire and shattered glass. Carey was struck twice in the stomach. Bleeding and stunned, he flung open the door and bolted. With bullets still flying, he ran back into the house he'd just left, sprinted through to the rear, and bolted over a garden wall, a wounded man running for his life. For decades, the name Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald echoed through the back streets of Dublin's Gangland like a warning shot. Hailing from the tough estates of Finglas, North Dublin, Fitzgerald wasn't just another street-level thug. He was a career criminal, a feared figure who managed to outlast rivals, escape justice, and build a reputation forged in violence, intimidation, and cold survival. By his late 40s, Fishy had evolved from a streetwise enforcer to one of Ireland's most notorious underworld veterans. His longevity in a world where few grow old was no accident. He survived not just the heat from Gardaí, but betrayals from former allies and feuds with rival mobs. If there was a code in Dublin's criminal circles, Fitzgerald had helped write it and break it. Despite racking up 72 convictions, many seemingly petty traffic offences, Gardaí had long believed something darker lay beneath the surface. Beneath the minor charges, they saw the movements of a man orchestrating high-stakes criminal activity from the shadows. The Criminal Assets Bureau took notice early. In 2006, Fitzgerald was stopped by Gardaí and found with nearly €48,000 in cash hidden in a spare tyre. He claimed it was his. Investigators proved otherwise. The money was seized, ruled as criminal proceeds, a rare moment where the law briefly caught up with Fishy. By 2010, Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald had shifted from low-level crime to high-stakes operations. He was now leading a notorious armed robbery crew based in Finglas, a gang that would soon be labelled as one of the most active in modern Irish criminal history. Between 2010 and 2012, Fitzgerald's crew carried out an estimated 20 armed raids across Dublin, Meath and Kildare. These weren't slick surgical jobs, they were violent and chaotic. In some cases, the gang burst into family homes, leaving terrified civilians at the mercy of masked men demanding cash and valuables. Despite the growing scale of his crimes, Fitzgerald managed to stay below the public radar. His previous convictions were mostly minor, masking the true extent of his criminal evolution. But Gardaí weren't fooled. Inside law enforcement circles, Fitzgerald's name was well known, and specialist units had him in their crosshairs. This robbery spree wasn't just a quick grab for cash. Garda intelligence later suggested the proceeds were pumped directly into drug operations, funding a network that stretched deeper than anyone had realised. By this stage, Fitzgerald had also developed a serious cocaine habit, and he made little effort to hide it. As his power expanded, so did his violence. He began acting as a de facto gangland enforcer in Finglas, using fear and brute force to keep control. Locals were threatened into submission. Some families were also harassed as they fled their homes entirely. Others were forced to let the gang use their houses as stash spots for guns and drugs. Criminal occupation by intimidation. In 2012, Gardaí struck back. Acting on intelligence, they raided a vacant house in Finglas and uncovered a cannabis grow house linked to Fitzgerald's crew. Inside, they found over 100 plants worth around €40,000, along with a handgun and a shotgun. Clear evidence that the gang's drug trade was backed by firearms. Police believed locals had been coerced into allowing their properties to be used for gang activity. Even with this mounting pressure and repeated run-ins with the law, Fitzgerald somehow stayed one step ahead. Time and again, he managed to slip through the net, a ghost in the system, but a nightmare on the streets. In 2014, Gardaí made a troubling discovery: a loaded firearm stashed in the garden of an innocent neighbour, just doors away from Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald. Investigators believed the gun was linked to him and quickly brought both Fitzgerald and an associate in for questioning. It looked like the walls were finally closing in, but once again, no charges stuck. The case collapsed due to lack of evidence. By then, Fitzgerald had been a heavy cocaine user for years, and the paranoia was starting to show. Convinced he was being watched, he began travelling in disguises, sometimes wearing wigs, other times hiding in the back of vans just to leave his neighbourhood undetected. His associates even took things further, damaging Garda surveillance cameras in a bid to keep his movements off the radar. By late 2014, the cracks in Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald's empire began to show. That year, serious charges against him were abruptly dropped, a move that didn't just raise eyebrows in Garda HQ, but sent shockwaves through his own gang. The rumours came fast and venomous. Had Fishy flipped? Was he cutting deals behind closed doors? Suspicion hung heavy in the air, and loyalty began to rot from within. The fallout wasn't just whispered, it was violent. Fitzgerald was beaten by members of his own crew, the same men who once answered to him without question. In a flash, the feared gang boss was cast out, stripped of power and isolated from the very gang he built. Despite pulling off some of the country's most daring heists, Fitzgerald was said to be flat broke. The money was gone, the alliances shattered. But anyone who thought that was the end of Fishy Fitzgerald hadn't been paying attention. Even with his robbery crew in ruins, Fitzgerald didn't vanish. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows, still connected to Dublin's criminal elite. He had key links to members of Eamon the Don Dunn's gang, who controlled the drugs trade across North Dublin through the 2000s. Over the years, Fitzgerald was seen moving in the same circles as some of the city's most infamous figures, including Alan Fatpuss Bradley and Christopher Git Waldron. As the so-called Flashy gang rose to dominance in North Dublin's drug scene, Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald kept his distance. He ran his own operations, older, more seasoned, and not eager to answer to the younger crew now calling the shots. But staying separate didn't mean staying safe. Fitzgerald soon clashed with the Flashy gang, led by young kingpin Glenn Ward, and tensions quickly escalated. At one point, Fishy was threatened with decapitation, a brutal warning over a drug-related dispute. The streets of Finglas were once again on the edge of war, and this time, Fitzgerald was caught in the crossfire. As Finglas descended deeper into gangland chaos, Fitzgerald found himself entangled in one of the area's most volatile feuds. Glenn Ward had turned on his former ally James Whelan, igniting a bloody fallout between two once close friends. When the split happened, Fishy picked his side. He aligned with Whelan's camp, positioning himself against Ward and the media dubbed Gucci Gang. By now in his 40s, Fitzgerald had taken on a different role, a gangland veteran, seen by many younger criminals as a mentor. He even took a teenage associate of Whelan's under his wing, a rising star in the Underworld, unaware he was hurtling toward infamy. On April 3, 2022, that same feud claimed Whelan's life as he was gunned down on Deanstown Avenue, the first gangland murder of the year and a killing that poured petrol on an already raging fire. Fitzgerald remained in the background, coaching, connecting, and steering younger gang members involved in escalating tit-for-tat attacks against Ward's faction. His role wasn't flashy, but it was powerful. He was still a player. By 2025, the feud reached new terrifying heights. That young protege Fitzgerald had mentored became the target of an assassination plot. A drone, rigged with a live pipe bomb, was flown over Finglas, programmed to kill the gangster in broad daylight. However, the plot failed as the drone crash landed in the back garden of a completely innocent family home, and the bomb got dismantled. Nevertheless, the nature of the botched hit was unprecedented in Irish organised crime. Drones, pipe bombs, targeted assassinations. Dublin's gangland had entered a new era, and behind it all, Fishy Fitzgerald was still there, pulling strings, mentoring killers, and adapting to a high-tech age of street warfare. As blood spilled on the streets following the murder of James Whelan, another storm was closing in, this time on Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald. Gardaí had quietly been building a case against him in connection with a botched assassination attempt in 2021, one that nearly claimed the life of Gary the Canary Carey. Carey, a well-known drug dealer from West Dublin, had made dangerous enemies by late 2021. According to Garda sources, he had fallen out with the family, a Ballyfermot-based organised crime group, as well as members of Brian Rattigan's crew. The tension wasn't just talk. Carey was living on borrowed time. That threat became terrifyingly real on the night of November 17, 2021. Somehow, despite being hit in the stomach, Carey managed to survive the Ballyfermot hit. Neighbours found him collapsed and raised the alarm, and he was rushed to hospital in critical condition. One bullet was removed. Another was lodged too close to vital organs to operate. His survival was nothing short of miraculous. In the background of this near-fatal attack stood Patrick Fitzgerald, not the trigger man, but the enabler, the one who made it happen. Fitzgerald played a crucial logistical role in the attempted murder. In the days before the shooting, he purchased 2 vehicles, a black Opel Zafira for €750 and a gold Toyota Avensis for €800. He fueled the Zafira, conducted reconnaissance around Ballyfermot, and handed over the car to the hit team on the day of the attack. After the shooting ended and Carey lay wounded, Fitzgerald quickly took charge, organising the escape and cover-up. Later, the Zafira was discovered burned out, with 2 handguns left inside, the very weapons thought to have been used in the attack. The Avensis, serving as a backup getaway car, was also set ablaze and abandoned that same night. Unravelling the plot took months of meticulous detective work. Gardaí pored over CCTV footage, tracked vehicle movements, and cross-referenced phone data. Bit by bit, they placed the story together. In court, the evidence was clear. Fitzgerald's phone activity and CCTV appearances placed him at the heart of the operation. Cameras caught him driving both vehicles around Finglas in the week leading up to the hit. He didn't pull the trigger, but he was the one who made sure the trigger could be pulled. Patrick Fitzgerald was the logistical architect behind the ambush, a man who didn't need to fire a single shot to nearly take a life. Gary the Canary Carey survived the Ballyfermot ambush, but it bought him little time. After a brief move to Spain, Carey returned to Dublin in June 2022. Just 2 months later, in a separate attack in the south inner city, he was shot multiple times, and this time, he didn't survive. Carey succumbed to his injuries on August 5, 2022. Though Patrick Fitzgerald wasn't involved in the fatal shooting, Gardaí had already built a strong case connecting him to the earlier failed attempt on Carey's life. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder, a serious accusation that carried the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. As the trial unfolded, it became clear Fitzgerald hadn't been the one to pull the trigger. Instead, he'd played a key role in facilitating the attack. Faced with overwhelming evidence, in May 2025, he pleaded guilty to a reduced charge, facilitating a criminal organisation in carrying out the attempted murder. It was a calculated legal move, acknowledging his involvement without admitting direct responsibility for the shooting. Still, a significant prison term was unavoidable. Even while out on bail awaiting trial for the Carey case, Fitzgerald's criminal activities continued. In August 2023, he participated in a violent home invasion orchestrated by another associate. Alongside several others, Fitzgerald stormed a house in South Dublin during the early hours, where an elderly couple in their 70s, their adult daughter, and a 6-year-old child lived. The gang tied up the family and ransacked the home, terrifying the victims. Reports suggested the victims were related to a former bank employee, and the gang believed there was money hidden inside. This brutal incident revealed Fitzgerald's willingness to target innocent people, including vulnerable elderly individuals and a young child, even while he was out on bail. His disregard for law and human safety was clear. Intimidation was second nature, and no one was off limits. When the home invasion case went to court, even Fitzgerald's own lawyers pleaded for leniency. They urged the judge to consider his sentences collectively to avoid an excessive total prison term, but sympathy was scarce. In February 2025, the Central Criminal Court sentenced him to 7.5 years behind bars for the home invasion, adding to the time he faced for the Carey case. Now, in 2025, Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald is serving time in prison, with more years likely to be tacked on after his upcoming sentencing for facilitating attempted murder expected mid-year. His sentences could be served consecutively, extending his incarceration further. For a man who had evaded serious jail time for decades despite numerous convictions, the time has finally caught up with him. Fitzgerald's reign of fear and violence left a trail of broken families, bloody feuds, and communities scarred by his actions. Yet despite his seeming untouchability, relentless police work and the weight of his own crimes ultimately brought him down. After a lifetime roaming Dublin streets, Patrick Fishy Fitzgerald is now exactly where he belongs, behind bars. The night of February 18, 2009, the air around Dublin's Keane district was heavy with drizzle. Inside Grumpy Jack's, a local pub tucked between the narrow streets, the atmosphere was deceptively ordinary. Pints clinked against wood, football played faintly on the television, and regulars gathered in their usual corners. Among them was John Champagne Carroll, a man whose name had long been whispered in the city's underworld, and who was related to drugs godfather George Mitchell. Carroll, 33 years old, carried himself with a quiet confidence that came from years of dealing in the shadows of Dublin's booming drug trade. Gardaí knew him as a player, someone who moved with serious criminals, someone with money, connections, and enemies. And enemies were everywhere. What Carroll didn't know that evening was that as he sat chatting in Grumpy Jack's, his death warrant had already been signed. Around 9:30 p.m, a motorbike pulled up outside, and the passenger, wearing a helmet, went inside. Witnesses later recalled his expressionless face, his calm movements. He wasn't there for a drink. The gun was already in his hand as he immediately identified Carroll. What followed was sudden, chaotic, and terrifying. Carroll darted across the pub in an attempt to escape, but was shot multiple times at point-blank range. Screams ripped through the bar as drinkers dived to the floor, pints and glass exploding around them. The gunman fled into the night, leaving behind shattered glass, blood on the wooden floorboards, and a community frozen in shock. In the dark underbelly of Dublin's south side, one name carried fear and notoriety: Christopher Git Zambra. To some, he was just another street criminal from Drimna. To others, he was a ruthless operator who clawed his way into the city's most dangerous ranks. Zambra's early life told a different story. He once pulled on the green jersey, playing football for Ireland in his youth. He even nurtured dreams of a music career, writing Cat Stevens-inspired songs and promoting them online. But those ambitions were soon buried under a darker reality. The young hopeful became a hardened armed robber, then one of Dublin's most notorious drug traffickers, a man whose name was whispered in connection with murder. Zambra's story began like so many others born into Dublin's criminal heartlands: small jobs, street fights, and low-level drug dealing. But he wasn't content with scraps. He had ambition, connections, and a willingness to use violence when it suited him. Those qualities made him valuable and dangerous. By the early 2000s, Dublin was gripped by the crumbling Drimna feud, a bloody war between rival gangs that left bodies in the streets and fear in the air. Zambra thrived in that chaos. He forged alliances, traded in drugs, and built a reputation as someone who couldn't be intimidated. Garda intelligence files linked him to shipments of narcotics, violent assaults, and suspected contract hits. His name started appearing in whispered conversations in pubs and on street corners. His reputation grew. Zambra was feared, but also respected. The whispers on the street said he had money, connections, and protection from some of the city's most dangerous criminals. Gardaí linked him to drugs, weapons, and suspected contract killings. Git Zambra was someone you didn't cross. By the late 2000s, Christopher Git Zambra's name was drifting across Garda intelligence files with increasing regularity. He wasn't just suspected of drug dealing or street-level violence anymore. Detectives believed his fingerprints, figuratively at least, were all over a series of bloody killings that shocked Dublin's south side. The first came in October 2007, when Brian Downs, a garage owner in Walkinstown, was gunned down in cold blood. Downs was no ordinary mechanic. Gardaí suspected he had deep ties to criminal money, fronting business ventures that blurred the line between legitimate trade and gangland finance. When he was cut down at his own premises, it looked less like random violence and more like an execution. Caught in the crossfire the same day was Edward Ward, just 26 years old, a worker at Downs' garage. Ward wasn't part of the Underworld. He was an innocent man who happened to be there when the bullets started flying. His murder underlined the ruthlessness of Dublin's gangland. No witnesses, no loose ends. Just weeks later, in November 2007, another figure with links to Downs was killed. Sean McMahon, a businessman in Tallaght, was shot dead in his own home. Gardaí believed McMahon had been connected to laundering money for Zambra's operations and that a financial deal had spiraled fatally out of control. The theory was simple and chilling. Money went missing, trust evaporated, and McMahon paid the price with his life. The cycle of killings didn't stop there. In March 2008, John Burney, a 29-year-old father of 4, was murdered at his house in Newcastle, West Dublin. The attack bore the same hallmarks: a professional hit, efficient and merciless. Garda sources whispered that the same hitman had been used across several of these killings, a gun for hire with Zambra somewhere in the shadows pulling strings. 4 men dead in less than 6 months, 2 of them known criminals, 1 alleged money launderer, 1 an innocent bystander. Different lives, different worlds, but all tied together in Garda files by one name: Christopher Git Zambra. None of these suspicions were ever proven in court, but to investigators, the pattern was unmistakable. Zambra wasn't just surviving in Dublin's underworld, he was thriving in it, his reach stretching from drug shipments to suspected contract killings. And with every fresh body on the streets, his reputation grew darker, more feared, and more dangerous. In February 2009, Dublin's underworld was shaken when John Champagne Carroll was gunned down inside Grumpy Jack's pub in the Coombe. At the time of his death, Carroll carried a handwritten list of debts, nearly €250,000 owed to him by criminals. To investigators, the document looked like a death warrant. The killing quickly spiraled into one of the most controversial gangland trials in Irish history. Carroll was said to have been targeted after rumours spread that he had become involved with the former girlfriend of a powerful gangster. In the weeks before his death, he had been so paranoid about the threats against him that he avoided staying at his own home, instead moving between hotels for safety. When the ambush finally came, it was brutal and calculated. 4 men were eventually charged in connection with Carroll's murder. Of those, only one, 29-year-old gunman Peter Kenny, was convicted, his fate sealed by the testimony of state witness Joey O'Brien, who later entered the witness protection program. Garda intelligence suggested Carroll may have been betrayed by some of his closest associates. Investigators believed he was set up, and whispers from the underworld pointed towards Christopher Git Zambra as the man suspected of orchestrating the hit. The prosecution's case hinged on the testimony of drug dealer Joey O'Brien, who claimed he had met with Christopher Zambra and others in the days leading up to Carroll's murder. According to O'Brien, the killing was planned during these meetings, with Zambra allegedly offering €30,000 for the hit. He said Zambra asked him to secure a motorbike for the job and to arrange for it to be burned afterwards. O'Brien openly admitted his own involvement in the plot, but was never charged. Instead, he was granted a form of immunity, testifying under the assurance that his words could not be used against him. Today he lives under witness protection, far from Dublin, but despite his dramatic claims, the case quickly unravelled. Under cross-examination, O'Brien's credibility collapsed, his story shredded by the defence. After years of trials and retrials, the outcome was clear. In 2013, Christopher Zambra walked free. The acquittal reinforced his image as a man beyond the reach of the law, untouchable in the eyes of many. Yet in the shadows, suspicion lingered that Zambra remained deeply entangled in the violent web of Dublin's gangland. By 2014, Christopher Zambra was no longer the untouchable figure he once seemed. His world was crumbling, rivals were circling, allies were turning their backs, and whispers of lost money and unpaid debt spread through the underworld. In Dublin's gangland, weakness of that kind was a death sentence. With his name linked to 5 murders, Zambra knew the walls were closing in. Paranoia gripped him, and he went to extraordinary lengths to stay one step ahead. From a Dublin dealership, he purchased 2 identical black BMWs, requesting that their license plates differ by just a single digit. His plan was simple. One car could act as a decoy while he slipped away in the other. Every moment was calculated. A motorbike scout always rode ahead to check the streets, ensuring the coast was clear. A small convoy shadowed him, scoping out destinations before he arrived, making sure there were no surprises. Zambra lived in constant fear, yet clung to the belief that with enough caution and deception, he could outwit those who wanted him dead. On May 4, 2014, despite all his elaborate precautions, Christopher Zambra's luck finally ran out. The 37-year-old was tailed as he drove from his home on Galtimore Road to his sister's house on nearby Cooley Road. It was just before 3 in the afternoon, and he had no idea that his killers were already closing in. As he pulled up outside, a Nissan Qashqai drew alongside his Audi. In an instant, the quiet street erupted into violence. An assassin leaned out of the rear window and unleashed a volley of 7 shots. Zambra slumped across the passenger seat, but managed to claw his way out of the car, staggering down the path in a desperate bid to escape. The gunman pursued him, catching up near his sister's home. Neighbours looked on in horror as the 2 men grappled, Zambra fighting for his life despite his wounds. The struggle ended brutally. The assassin held him over a garden fence, pulled out a second weapon, and fired again, before returning to the getaway car. Zambra collapsed in the garden, bullets tearing through his chest, blood soaking into the grass. By the time Gardaí arrived at 3:02 p.m, the street was in chaos. Family members had rushed out, screaming in desperation, while Zambra's niece knelt beside him in the garden, clutching his hand as his life slipped away. Neighbours stood frozen as the quiet Drimna road filled with the echo of gunfire. Zambra was pronounced dead at the scene. The post-mortem later confirmed what was already clear. Catastrophic chest injuries from multiple gunshot wounds had ended his life. The killers vanished with chilling precision. Their getaway car, the Nissan Qashqai, was soon discovered burnt out on nearby Bedmadigan Road. Inside lay 2 weapons, a 9mm pistol and a .38 revolver, both fire damaged beyond recognition, stripped of any forensic clues. In the aftermath, Gardaí also found a gun hidden in Zambra's own Audi, suggesting he knew better than most the danger closing in around him. CCTV footage revealed what detectives had feared. Zambra had been followed that day, shadowed from the moment he left his home. Every move tracked until the ambush outside his sister's door. The investigation that followed was vast, more than 250 lines of inquiry and 190 witness statements pursued. Yet despite the scale of the effort, everything about the murder pointed to a carefully planned gangland hit. Efficient, ruthless, and mercilessly final. In the months leading up to his death, Christopher Zambra had made powerful enemies, and Gardaí pursued several live lines of inquiry into who ordered his assassination. At the top of the list was the real IRA. Detectives believed dissident Republicans blamed one of Zambra's associates for the murder of their leader Alan Ryan in 2012. Ryan, who had been shot dead on Dublin's north side, had tried to force crime gangs to hand over a cut of their racketeering and drug profits. Gardaí could not rule out that Ryan's allies sought revenge through Zambra's killing. Another theory pointed to the fallout from the murder of John Champagne Carroll. Although Zambra was acquitted in court, detectives remained convinced he had organised the hit, and even his own death may have been retribution. A third line of inquiry focused on a bitter turf war with a major Tallaght drug trafficker, a rival with both motive and means to remove Zambra from the streets. Then there was the possibility of a love rival. Garda sources believed Zambra had been romantically involved with the ex-girlfriend of a jailed gangster, a man notorious for ordering hits on her previous boyfriends. The theory that he orchestrated Zambra's assassination could not be dismissed. Finally, suspicion also fell on one of Zambra's closest allies, Jonathan Gill, better known as Mr. Big. Gill, long suspected of arranging Alan Ryan's murder, was also believed to have turned on Zambra after a major falling out. Zambra had recently lost possession of a large amount of cash under investigation by the Criminal Assets Bureau, and Garda intelligence suggested some of that money belonged to Gill. Their relationship may have ended not in loyalty, but betrayal. 4 months after Zambra's death, Gardaí arrested 2 men as part of the investigation. Yet to this day, no one has ever been convicted of his murder. That was it for today's video. What are your thoughts on today's topic? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see our next videos.